When you look at the proposal, though, we only see 7 sites. There's no costs, no amount of energy in terms of what they're going to provide into the market. Wouldn't you like to see that detail?
Well, I'm sure detail would come with any sort of announcements. You always expect to see detail. But the first thing we've got to do in Australia is have a good debate about it. So the discussion has started. We need to see the Environment Protection, Biodiversity, Conservation Act, the prohibition on nuclear lifted, and then we will see interested parties across the world really seriously looking at Australia. Until that happens, no one is going to put absolute costs on the table because it wouldn't make sense to even do something like that. So that's first and foremost in where we might go. But there's a lot of facts out there that we already know. This is a safe technology. It's used around the world, particularly in developed economies. We're seeing that already. We're seeing nuclear waste, that being solved across the world, and nuclear electricity for Australia it's a sensible approach, along with rolling out renewables as quickly as we possibly can, getting gas replacement where we're seeing coal-fired power at the moment, which is being heavily subsidised, replacing that, and then what comes next is nuclear energy to fill that gap out to that 2050. Only then will we see net zero by 2050 at the cheapest price possible for all Australians. We need to get the cost of energy down for the medium to longer term.
Are you comfortable with the model as put by the coalition of a government-owned asset and then other private operators come in to run the facilities?
Well, there's a debate about who owns energy anywhere in the world, and we've got a combination of assets at the moment owned by nationally within Australia. There are coal-fired power stations in Queensland that are owned by the state. We see private enterprise investing. So it's a matter of how we get that investment very quickly. So what I'm hearing from this announcement made yesterday is that the coalition have said, we want this to happen quickly. The state will invest in at least the short term in nuclear energy. And then we may see that transfer, as we've seen other assets transfer in the past, to the private sector. But what it does is de-risk this particular option for Australians.
If it de-risks that option, does it then de-incentivise investment elsewhere, like in renewables?
Well, we would, as I said, want to see renewables rolled out as quickly as possible. We've got a very diverse energy system in Australia, a long skinny grid up the east coast of Australia, and transmission and distribution is going to be rolled out where it makes sense in those renewable precincts that have already been announced by the government. So that will continue, not just on the east coast, but of course west coast, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory. We're going to see renewables rolled out. That makes sense. But we need also gas to be firming that and replacing what are old assets, old coal-fired power assets that have actually come to the end of their life, that are now being heavily subsidised. And I can point to two, Eraring at $450 million over 2 years in New South Wales. And we're seeing an asset in Victoria that will also need to be heavily subsidised. Swapping those out in the short term makes sense, and then replacing with different energy options in the longer term.
It's really interesting hearing your reaction, Tania, because it doesn't sound like you're saying it shouldn't be either or when it comes to the Labor or coalition approach. It should be both, that we need both, all of it.
Absolutely. That's how you get a least cost approach to energy, Kieran. We've seen different announcements on the technologies themselves. What we need to get back on is what is the end goal? And the end goal is net zero by 2050. It's going to take a range of energy sources to get there. So the pathway that the government has announced already, with some renewables in the system, a lot of renewables in the system, it certainly makes sense. But everyone's forgotten about the need for gas. This is a dash for gas. We need more supply of gas because that's going to firm that renewable capacity in the short term. Then, again, we move on to other energy sources. And there are other energy options over and above what the coalition have put forward on nuclear. Biomass is another example. But all of it is going to be needed if we want to see clean, reliable, 24/7, cheaper, and it's not going to be cheap, but at least cost energy for all Australians, and that includes business. We need the energy for that longer term, and energy in Australia is extremely expensive.
Minerals Council of Australia Chief Executive Tania Constable, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Kieran.